basic training topic today is Viewpoint ProContractor Basic Training, Admin Setup, Security, and Utilities. Presenting the topic is John Bonzel, who is a Senior Professional Services Consultant. John has been with Viewpoint, formerly Maxwell Systems, for over 10 years and has 25 years experience working with construction accounting software. John?
Excellent. Thank you, Leslie. So today what we're going to be talking about is administrative functional area setup and utilities, which is essentially some critical setup items that need to be addressed, looked at, configured, and massaged to get started in utilizing ProContractor. Some of the things that we will look at include user setup and security, the utility functions for changing a code if you don't like it, or merging user codes, payment terms, sales tax setup, cost types, contact records, user-defined fields. All those items are setup items that we'll be looking at within this presentation, as well as initial balance posting groups. So the slideshow is intended to be a referenceable item. So at the end of this presentation, you will get an email address that shows up that you can send an email to if you're interested in getting the PowerPoint presentation, which, as I said, will have referenceable slides on it for some of these setup items. So the lesson objectives are basically to go through and discover and get some coaching on how to define a new company, how to set up new users and user logins, security groups if applicable, how to understand how to merge and change setup items if we don't like what the IDs or the codes are. Applying the import function, we'll see where that screen is. We'll look at the cost type definitions, standard text application, contact type additions and adding contacts, tuning document management settings, which is applicable for what we refer to as project documents, as well as document management types, setup tables for configuring certain standard things that are going to be used over and over and over again. In addition to those setup items, we'll also be looking at those setup items that you currently see on the screen as well, including payment terms, sales tax, manufacturers for equipment, if that is an optional module that you've purchased, system settings for auto numbering new master file records when you're adding them, binder item types. So this is a table that we basically allow the definition of categories so that we can access binder items more easily in the future, create filter mechanisms for them, and of course posting groups for initial balances. So these following slides are designed to be referenceable items that you can use to go to that specific item. So at the top of the slide for the company setup items as example, we see the path to get to where the company setup is located. It's all tasks, administration, company division, and then company. And what this function allows us to do is to define a company, define the GL structure that we're going to be using with that company. We can set up a certain coloring scheme with that company, which is very useful in multiple company environments, so that you get a color indicator that gives you basically a reminder of which company you're in. We'll see how to attach a corporate logo. Now, one of the things that you will notice in this presentation when we get to actually looking at the software is that I'm leveraging the what we call the standard configuration. So there's some things that are built into that standard configuration, and much of the presentation when we get to the actual presentation of the software is going to be leveraging those standard configuration items that are delivered to you when you basically purchase a ProContractor. So we'll discuss how to define physical periods and how we basically close a period. Again, we see the path to that specific function there. And that's the path that we would basically go down to essentially close a month if we wanted to, and we'll look at how that function works in the software, as well as a place where we can store a password that's required if somebody tries to post an accounting transaction that goes back into a closed period. There's a password for that that'll allow it to happen, and we'll see where that password is set. So a side note, when we get to physical period definitions, it's very common that the last day of the month is the end of a physical period. You might have 12, possibly 13 physical periods, which would tie to months if it's 12. And if you're going to deviate from that as part of your configuration, it's highly suggested that you seek a professional services consultant to discuss what the goals of that closing configuration or physical period configuration is in the last closing date of a month. So if you're going to pick something other than the last day of a month, or you're interested in intercompany setup, which is an optional module, it's strongly suggested that you get a professional services consultant involved with discussing the cause and the effect of the setup items around those areas of the software. So we'll go into and discuss in our presentation security and the setup of user logins. And as we see from the slide, what will happen and what we'll see in that setup is basically two folders that can be leveraged. One is the user folder where individual users are defined, and the functional areas that they can have access to within the software can also be defined within that user login setup. Or alternatively, we can create user group, what we call user group, which are essentially canned security properties. And those user groups can be associated with individual users so that those users inherit those security properties and then can be refined or fine-tuned from that general security property starting point. And we'll see how that works. We'll have some discussion around the change and merge user code functionality as well as importing data. I think that these items somewhat speak for themselves. The change user code allows me to change a user code on something like a master file record. If I don't like what the ID is that that particular master file record was saved as, I can go into the change utility and literally change what that code is through the change function. The merge user codes is limited to certain items that I can merge together. As you see in the slide, it's customer, vendors, and chart of account numbers that I can merge together. So if somebody was to mistakenly create two vendor records as an example, and they didn't realize at the time that somebody else had already set up that vendor record, we could use this merge user code function to basically merge those two vendors into one, and any of the corresponding transactions that may have been posted would also get merged into that single entity once they were merged. We'll also take a look at the import functions, where those things are located, as well as how they work at a very high level. I like to think that the import function is fairly intuitive. If you've ever imported something before into any other software product, I think you will find the same, that the import function for importing data into ProContractor to get started is fairly intuitive. Also included in what we'll discuss around the importing data is the ability to import daily field information into the payroll system for time card information to get auto-loaded as an example, or work in progress updates that could come from daily field reports to update percentages complete or units complete on specific projects. The administrative setup items that we're going to be looking at include everything that is included in the folder for the most part. And as we go through the folder, we're going to see each one of these settings that are going to come up on the next slide. So that would include the Connect settings, which is specific to the mobile iPad app, which we call Mobile Connect, as well as Project Connect, which is a software piece of that, and the configuration of which resources individuals are going to see from either that Project Connect or the iPad app Mobile Connect. We'll see where those controls are at and the synchronization options around those things. Modifying forms and reports. Again, at a very high level, we're going to show you where these things are at, but neither of these items are going to be covered in detail. Mobile Connect is generally covered. There's some specific recordings, webinar recordings for Mobile Connect in particular, as well as recordings around utilizing SQL reporting. So as we talk about those things at a very high level, keep in mind that those specific subjects are covered in other best practice webinars. The specific items, that setup items that we're going to be looking at in this presentation will include payment terms. So there's a table that holds payment terms for vendor and customer records, and we'll see where that table is at and how to add things to it if necessary for customer terms or vendor terms. Sales tax setup. We'll get into a discussion around the sales tax setup, and this is sales tax setup is generally utilized for one of two reasons. The sales tax setup will control the sales tax reports and what's reported on there. So if you have to collect sales tax and pass that through to a state or a county, the sales tax definition, or what we call the sales tax authority, needs to be defined within this table so that we can get that reporting straight in its corresponding percentages. And if you have multiple entities that make up a sales tax and you need to report on those individual entities, an example might be the city of San Francisco, as an example, has things like BART tax or Metro tax for sales tax. They have the city sales tax, county sales tax, as well as the state tax. Each one of those authorities would be defined as its own tax authority and then linked via a tax authority link so that we could track each one of the individual components within our reporting. Aside from the reportings, a lot of times a sales tax code is also set up in a more general way so that sales tax gets calculated for us on things like purchase orders. So we may set up a general sales tax that's just representative of the tax percentage so that we can add that tax percentage code to, as I said before, something like a purchase order and get the tax calculation happening for us on that purchase order. And in that vague description, we're not so concerned with the back-end sales tax reporting. We're already paying the sales tax when we're acquiring the materials, but we would like for the software to go ahead and calculate for us what that sales tax is. We'll go in and look at the cost type setup. This is a perfect example of why we strongly suggest leveraging the standard configuration set that's included with the software. If you choose to use that standard data set, there's a bunch of cost types that are already set up for you, and we'll see that. But the cost type setup also allows us to add new cost types if we need to at any point in time going forward within the software. And if we want to tie a default chart of account number with that cost type, we can certainly do that as well. We'll be looking at that. There's a place in administrative setup for standard text. Again, all paths are being referenced within these slides. And in general, the standard text allows us to create a standard memo text item that we want to use within a certain area of the software. And then with definition of a certain set of characters, we would just put those things in, and that a whole bunch of text would autofill based on our standard text configuration. And we will see what that looks like within the software. Contacts. So Rolodex used to be a very common thing in the office place, and the Rolodex would have your individual contact information on it. The contact master file within ProContractor is designed to be the equivalent of that. And the contact master file is where I keep individual names, what their individual contact information is, like email address, phone numbers, and I can also link individual contacts to what we call companies, which is most commonly a vendor or a customer record. And when I set up a contact, I can also basically relate that contact to what we call contact types, so that when I need to look up a contact, I can quickly specify what type of contact it is that I'm looking for and get my contact list filtered to just that specific type. So we'll be taking a look at how we can basically define our own types, add our own types, as well as add contacts. Document management settings. So we will talk about document management settings at a high level. This may be a little redundant because the document management settings is also something that's going to be discussed and leveraged within project management. But because it's an admin function, I will cover it at a very high level. So the document management settings in general is a set of checkboxes that we will see, and those checkboxes allow me to turn on and off certain functions like auto-creating a PDF or requiring somebody to add change comments to a specific document if they're going to change it. And we'll look to see where those controls are at. Same thing with document management types. There may be some redundancy with some other webinars as well as specific training sessions, because document management types are highly leveraged within project management and project documents specifically. So this path shows us how to reference, or this reference path shows us how to access that table, I should say. And once in that table, there's a whole bunch of subtabs. These are the specific subtabs that we would see for creating items that are going to be used with project documents. Now, one of the subtabs that gets created links back to daily field reporting. And daily field reporting has some tables that are associated with it for canned weather conditions, so set weather conditions. If you want to have certain sky conditions, clear, cloudy, sunny, that type of thing predefined within the tables for weather conditions, you can do that. Wind, precipitation, those types of things could be set up with certain defaults within this setup table, so that people could commonly just go pull one of the drop-down items for the basic weather conditions that we're interested in tracking. Absent reasons for employees, which is a real cool function, allows you to track why your employee isn't at work. You can create those absent reasons within daily field reporting so that you have some record of that information. And this is an item that currently can be tracked through daily field reporting. While it isn't available specifically to the payroll system, it is available to the daily field reporting. And there's also a place to define incident types so that you can have canned types of incidents, like unforeseen conditions as an example, that I might use over and over again on my daily field reporting. I could predefine that particular incident type definition so that I don't have to key it in each time. We also have types of checklists, types of project plans, types of meeting minutes, types of drawings defined within this document management types area of the program. Other items will include order types, and this is commonly leveraged against purchase orders and subcontract change orders. If I want to create a filtering mechanisms for those types of documents that I might create, that's order types allows me to have that filtering mechanism so that I can group or categorize these types of documents. The same thing with CMRs, which are basically change management records. So if you see the term CMR, it's referring to change orders, and I can create some types to categorize change orders if I chose to do so, as well as owner change orders. So the billing side of the change order component, if an owner is going to get billed for it, we would create an owner change order, and there's a place to define types of owner change orders if we wanted to categorize those things, as well as field order types if that optional module has been purchased. field orders in general is a work ticket that is intended to go to a service technician to go into the field. That work ticket is something that a service technician could basically write down any materials at the time of that he or she was on the job, so that field order could come back into the back office. That information could be entered. Manufacturer is a place in the software where manufacturers can be configured and associated with equipment if you have the equipment module. System settings is a very high-level setting area for defining our auto numbering rules. So if we're going to auto number master file records, customers, vendors, employees, that kind of thing, we can define what we want the auto numbering masking to look like. For example, I want to use alpha characters at the beginning, starting with the name. Is very common. And how many characters do I want to use alphas for would be an example of the auto numbering rules. Binder item types. So the binder items in ProContractor is our attachment mechanism for keeping track of images that we want to track electronically and not have to be fully reliant on paper. And there's a place within the software to define the types of binder items that we're interested in categorizing. Administrative setup. This is going to be a place where we can see the views of what we've set up within our administration, our specific administrative items. This is another topic where there's additional best practice webinars available for setting up, configuring views, but we'll take a look at where the setup view option is, since much of our discussion is going to be centered around the administrative setup items. And lastly, we'll look at posting groups, and this is going to be specific to posting groups for initial balances. So let's go ahead and go into the software and get started with those items. So the first thing that we're going to look at is a company setup, and we're going to be focused in on the administrative functional area of the program. When I open up the administration, the first thing that's available to me is a company and division folder. If I open that folder up, the first option here is company, and that will open up the company definition screen in the main pane. What I referred to before is when you get your database and you start with configuring a brand new live database in ProContractor, you will get a standard configuration that's based on this company 01. And so if I choose that I'm going to leverage that basic standard setup that's already been included with the software, what I can do is I can pull up that company 01 and basically change what the name is here to whatever my company name is, as well as filling in the other fields here that is information around my company: phone number, fax number, address would go to the address subtab of my company address. And this would be a way that I could get started by leveraging some things that have already been set up for me associated with this company number 1. Now, if I wanted to set up a brand new company, what I would do is I would come into the screen, and instead of pulling the lookup, I would give it an ID of what this new company is going to be. In this case, I'll call it JB. This is going to be JB Construction. And as you can see, anything in yellow is going to be a required field. So I'm going to have to at least fill out this information. Plus, I could fill out any of this other information that was relevant to this company that I wanted to track within the software. Over here on the right-hand side, there's an active and inactive switch for inactivating a company later if you ever have the need to do that. Now, if I set up a brand new company, nothing's going to be pre-configured. That would include the chart of accounts. So what would be necessary here is you would have to, under the current year earnings account, specify a number that's going to automatically get added to the chart of accounts where the current year earnings is going to go. So in this case, I might choose something like 3,800 to have this fall into the equities area of the chart of accounts that I have yet to set up, because there is no chart of accounts for company JB. But if I do that, that's going to automatically set that account number up for me. Now, the other thing that can be done is very useful in multi-company setups is to basically select a color scheme by unchecking the default color tab box and then selecting whatever color that you want. And what this will do is it will create a shading around the border of each window to give you some idea that you're in this second company, as an example. The nice thing with ProContractor is you can set up as many companies as you would like. There's no additional charges for that. There is, of course, the time investment required to get each company configured. Now, to attach a logo is simply a matter of selecting this attach button, and that would open up a open Windows dialog box so you can browse to wherever your logo is and attach to it. All right, now one of the things to consider around a company setup also is this GL structure. We can choose either company only, or we can choose company with divisions. Company with divisions allows me to create multiple divisions that I can, or departments they're sometimes referred to, that I can run financial reporting around. So if I have multiple locations, as an example, and I want to see how my locations are doing on my financial reporting, and I want to be able to run that by location, I might turn the divisions on to be able to track those various locations. So divisions or departments, if we use the company with divisions, what that will allow me to do is it will allow me to go to this division option and define what my divisions are going to be that I want to track. If I leave this as company only, because I'm not going to have multiple divisions, then this division option becomes irrelevant. So when I'm all done with my company setup, it would be save company. That new company would be an option within my database. Now, one thing that you will notice is that I get warnings that come up. So I know that this is a warning because it's basically a message that has a little yellow upside down yield sign. If this was an imperative item that had to be addressed before that record could be saved, I would get a red exclamation mark. And what this message is telling me is I didn't fill anything out for 1099 information, so if I print 1099s, they're not going to be right. So now you'll see I have two companies to select from. Physical periods. So the physical periods is where I can define the physical periods for that company that I'm in. Now you'll notice I'm in that company JB Construction, so that red really pops. I want to go back to my default company, which is going to be just my company name. It's called your company name, and again, that would have been changed if I would have renamed it over here underneath the company setup, which I didn't do. So that particular physical period item shows me what the current open period is right here. Now, this is where I mentioned in the slide presentation, if you're going to be closing physical periods by some other date other than the last day of a month, this would get set to a no, and we would strongly suggest that you discuss that with a professional services consultant, because at that point in time we would have to go in and define those physical periods. Okay? But if this is set to yes, the software will know that the last day of a month is the end of a physical period. This tells the software which month the fiscal year ends. Close periods by functional area. If I choose to set this to yes, that would open up this closed period by functional area subtab, so that I would have closed through dates for each functional module within the program. Vendors for AP as an example, customers for AR. My suggestion as a getting started point for most users is keep things simple by leaving this set to no. There's just a single close date. That single close date is controlled right here. If I need to close a month or I want to close up through a year, I simply would change this date, and that would, once I save that, that would close the period basically all the way through. Well, 2014 wouldn't be good at this point in time, but 2013 would make more sense. So that would basically close through the end of the year 2013. This close period password is a password that gets set for allowing transactions to get posted back into the closed period. So if I save this record with the end of the year of 2013, if somebody tried to post something in 2013 or earlier, they would get a pop-up that says, hey, you're trying to post into a closed period. What's the password? This is where we set the password. All right, and save periods at the end of this would basically close through that date. I'm not going to do that in my database, but that's how I would basically close a period. Intercompany setup, there's controls here for the intercompany setup. I'm not going to go into details in this presentation around the intercompany setup. That would be an optional item that could be purchased, and if that is something that needs to be configured, it's something that probably should be addressed with a professional services consultant. Security. So security is basically where I can define user logins and or can user group or security properties. So if I come into user, the first thing the software is going to do is want to know, hey, what do you want to do with this particular user ID? And the user ID is something that the software is using in the background. It's not something that you need to know. It's not something that you're going to use for your login. It's just something that the software is going to be using on the back end of its data tables for tracking things. So I'll say go ahead and auto-assign the user. I can put in the username. Any other information that I want to associate with this particular user can be filled in here. Specific email address, instant messenger, you can see the fields obviously. Down here under authentication is where I would literally set up my user login name. So the login name is exactly that. What is the user login name? In this case, I just want mine to be John, maybe my last initial, John B. That's going to be my login. And then whatever my password is going to be, I would set up in the new and verified password area. Now I should also mention that this particular presentation is being done on version 3.3 of the software. So if you're on a version that's earlier than 3.3, some of these screens may look a little bit different, as well as in the future as the software evolves, the screens may change a little bit, but conceptually each field that I'm discussing is going to remain the same. So there's a place in here where I can associate a user group. That user group is going to be if I want to have this user assume or get canned user security properties. You can see that this field is not required. Alternatively, if I just want to tune which items this user is going to have access to, I can go to the function permission subtab, and this is where all the security access is for this particular user. Now, one of the things that can happen when you come into the screen is it can be a bit overwhelming. There's like 600 items in here or something. I don't know if it's truly 600, but there's a lot of items in here. So having to go through these things one by one is not a realistic expectation. These security items are associated with what we call task groups, and these task groups correspond to my functional areas of the program over here under these buttons. So, for example, if I knew John wasn't going to have access to payroll, I didn't want him looking at employee records and seeing what other people made as far as earnings go, then what I could do is I could go to the task group and I could say, filter out everything but the employee functional area of the program. That employee functional area of the program would be my payroll items for the most part. And I could select all those items by checking the select checkbox at the top, and that will tag all the employee items. And then I could set the permissions here. So if John wasn't going to have access to payroll, I would select permissions to no access. John doesn't have access to anything employee related once I've done that and saved the user. Okay. Some additional settings to be aware of, my recommendation, and again, the additional settings items that you're seeing here, if you're on a version earlier than 3.3 of the software, you're going to see those same settings located over here under the General sub-tab. But those additional setting items they come up with certain settings by default. And I think what we would strongly recommend is if you're leveraging the standard data set and configuring this yourself, probably would be suggested just to go with the defaults. These things control items like, hey, is the user going to see error messages pop up when they get them, yes or no? Are they going to be administrator for the publisher settings? Are they going to have access to projects, and what's their access going to look like? And some of these can be tuned depending on your needs. If this user, as an example, is only going to see the projects that he was the project manager on, I might change this to access by contact type, and then John would only see the projects that he was the project manager on via the contact type sub-tab. The other thing to keep in mind around setting up a user is I need to tell the software that which company this particular user has access to. Now, the function permissions is controlled again underneath this sub-tab. So what I need to do on this sub-tab is basically tell the software, hey, which companies can John go into? So what I'm going to do is just say John can go into company 01. So I would select that company. I would say that he has full access to that company. And when I save this record again, whatever his function permissions were tuned to, that's what he would have access to. Estimating permissions, if you're using the estimating side of the software, this is where your controls are for which estimating functions this particular user is going to have access to or be allowed to have access to. Contact types. So when you save a new user, log in within ProContractor, it's going to set up a contact record for that particular user. When we set up contact records, we can relate that contact record to one or more types. Later in this presentation, we'll see where we can add to this table, but I could basically select whichever contact types are going to be associated with John in particular, and they can be more than one. So it could be none, it could be one, it could be all of them, it can be whatever is relevant to this new user that I'm setting up. I would want to associate them with the type. Now, one thing that I would strongly recommend is when I'm setting up a new user, I would set up a contact type that I call ProContractor users and have that on this list so that when I'm setting up a new login, I can relate this login contact with my ProContractor users. And I'll show you how to do that when we get to the contact type table. But what that does is it allows you to leverage things in the future for routing alerts, tasks, documents to individual ProContractor users. If I set that contact type up, I'll be able to filter out everybody besides my ProContractor users and get to those individual ProContractor users much more easily. Okay. So another way of basically getting these functioning permissions set up would be to define user groups. So the user groups table is a place where I can come in and predefine my functioning permissions and or which companies or divisions a certain group might have access to, so that when I set up a new user, I can just allow that user to be associated with a user group. And a user group definition is simply just a matter of assigning an ID and what the name of that user group is going to be. And then going through and setting the functioning permissions of where that user group is going to allow as far as access within the software is concerned, what they're going to be allowed to do. Okay, so if I set all my functioning permissions here to what this particular user group is going to have access to, then what I can do is just associate a user with that user group, and that user is going to inherit those properties. So again, I would select those areas of the program that I didn't want this user group specifically to have access to. So maybe things like employees. I don't want my project managers seeing financial information for the company, maybe, so I can filter to that task group, select all those items, and set to no access. Then I can continue to tune what I want this particular user group to have access to. I can save it. And then once I have that user group configured, I can associate that with one of my user records if I chose to do so. And that user would quickly inherit those user group properties and that within the function permissions. And then I can go turn things on and off that are specific to that user from there after inheriting those properties. Okay? If I need to reserve a concurrent user license for this user, that's what this checkbox is for. I would strongly encourage not doing that. It's basically going to reserve a license or take one away from your concurrent user licenses. The only time that I would do that is if I knew there was an individual user that has to be able to get on the software whenever they want to, and there might be some risk of all the concurrent user licensing being used up, then in that case we would check that box, but in general we're going to leave that unchecked. So that's how I set up the security and users. So the next item that we're going to be discussing is going to be underneath utilities. And the functions underneath utilities include the changing, merging user codes. And this is fairly simple. I pull this function up. I go to the specific item that I might want to change the ID on. Contact types is an example. And if I had added any contact type IDs like I did down here, and I don't like what this is called, so if I wanted this to be ACCDEPT for accounting department instead of just ACCT, I could go into the new user code column and I could change what that code is. Okay? So accounting department is an example. If I save this, the new ID user code would become accounting department instead of just accounting. Now this function is available for all sorts of different functions beyond contact types. So I'm going to close this and reopen it so that I can show you that. So this is more likely going to be applied to things like customer IDs or vendor master file IDs, which we'll find down here towards the bottom. But you can see I can pull up so many different functions within this particular change user code task so that I can change master file IDs if I need to. Okay? Similarly, I can merge things together, and that's going to be merge user codes. So merge user codes will allow me to merge any of these items. So if I have two things that need to be merged into one, I would select the appropriate master file where I want to do that. So chart of accounts is an example. I know I have a chart of accounts in company number 1. If I hit retrieve, I get a warning that's telling me, hey, you know what, if you merge two things together, you're not going to be able to undo that. And the Maxwell Systems recommendation is, hey, if you're going to be merging things together, you might consider getting a backup before you do that. And as far as merging items together around the chart of accounts, the only rule is that the account type needs to be the same. So I could merge two of these cash accounts together because the account type is the same, and I can do that by going to the target account column, and I'm just going to drag and drop this. So I'm going to move this account, target account number next to the source account, and I just use the drag and drop functionality to do that. So now what I could do is I could say, hey, I'm no longer going to use this certificate of deposits as an example. I want that to go into my general checking account. So what I would do is I'd come down to the certificate of deposits, and I would tell the software that, hey, I want that to get merged into that 1010 general checking account. And once I did that, those accounts would become merged. Okay? So that's the merge function. Import functions also located within utilities, and the import data function is the only one that we're going to cover within this presentation, is located right here. This table, when it comes up, I can basically import from a spreadsheet. So if you're getting started with ProContractor and you want to import vendors or customers from a spreadsheet, you can do so with this function. It requires you to basically adhere to a certain template format where those column headings are predefined. But once you have that template format and source spreadsheet set up, you would just browse to wherever it is via this button, select it, and then once that had been selected, you'd be able to get this button down here, get external data, would become illuminated. That would pull your spreadsheet information into this import data area of the program. A little sub-tab would pop up here, which is the validation functions, and we could use the validation functions to correct records if needed to. Once I had valid records, this would illuminate this checkbox for ready to import. I'd be able to check this and the import button, and any valid records would import at that point in time. Now, one of the things that is different than importing for spreadsheet might be importing for time cards. So we see under the import type here a time card option. This can be toggled from Excel to daily field reports, and if I do that, I can then use this lookup to basically, not that lookup, this lookup, to select which daily field reports that I wanted to select. And if I selected those daily field reports, I'd be able to pull in that time card information. So the daily field report function for importing is valid for both the employee time cards as far as work in progress. And this is an item that we don't want to get too sidetracked with how this works in detail in the interest of time. I would encourage you to experiment with it. You can experiment with it, and as long as you don't get to the import function, you're not really hurting anything. And if you have questions, a professional services consultant will be able to help you with that. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and discuss some of these other items at a high level. Backup and restore has a function for allowing backup and restoring. Not intended to be your best practice for backups. You should work with your IT professional on that. This is just a place where I can do a quick backup and or restore. This function should be run directly on the server if you ever need to use it, and it requires that everybody's out of the software. Okay? So let's go ahead and move on to some of our administrative setup items. So again, within administration, I'm going to find the last folder, which is the setup folder. That's going to be consistent throughout the program. Functional area, regardless of which one you go into, you'll find a setup folder is always the last setup folder. And our setup items for administration include this extensive list that we're going to need to work down. Okay? So we're going to start at the top of the list. So connect settings, this is basically where I can come in and by user, dictate to the software which projects an individual user is going to see for Mobile Connect or Project Connect. So this table would get populated once there was projects in my companies in SEG, and this is the controls where I would set which projects an individual user, iPad user, or just a user within ProContractor if they're using Project Connect. This is where I would define those projects that this user would see. Okay? If they're using the iPad app, here's where I would also be able to set up the synchronization options. Okay, so Mobile connects the iPad app. Project Connect is just the software component. So the items that I want to synchronize with either the Project Connect software piece or the Mobile Connect, which is more common, then I would select those items that I wanted to synchronize. So by putting a check mark in binder items as an example here, this iPad app admin would have their binder items between their iPad and the database getting synchronized anytime the iPad got into internet connection area and was connected to the internet so that it can be synced. Okay. Now, one of the things to consider around here, if you're going to be creating your synchronization options, is it's strongly suggested not to just go ahead and select everything. If you select all projects, you select sync everything about all projects, that iPad is going to spend a lot of time synchronizing. So it makes a better sense to consider what you're synchronizing to best leverage your bandwidth over the internet on what needs to get pushed to and from the iPad app, as an example. So this is where I can assign resources, which equipment, if I have the equipment module, do I need an iPad user to put into a daily field report, as an example. Which employees do I want this particular user to have access to? Again, from their iPad app is the most, and Mobile Connect is the most common place for them to put in employee time card information in the field. That starts with getting those things configured here and making sure that those resources are available to that individual user that's associated with that particular iPad. Okay. Now, there is another webinar that talks about that in more detail, but I just wanted you to be aware of where those things are at. Modify forms and reports. Again, we're not going to get sidetracked with this, but this is where I can come in to modify forms or reports that are within ProContractor. In the interest of time, that's all we're going to discuss about these two items. There is, again, a best practice webinar that discusses how to modify forms and reports specifically. Okay. Country and state, another item that you don't really need to touch. You're in a country and state, and all those things are turned on. Don't really need to go into there. So let's go ahead and drop down to payment terms. So this payment terms table, again, comes with some predefined items. So you see the predefined items that are on the screen. Now, if I need to add a new payment term item, what I would do is I would either click the plus sign or click to add a line here. And that allows me to define a new payment term items. So, for example, if I had a discounted terms of 2% that was net 20 days instead of net 30 days, I might have something like it was DIS 2 net 20 instead of this one that I have at the top that's net 30, and that would be 2%. If I pay within 10 days, otherwise it's going to be net 20 days. Now when I'm adding a new terms, the items, these first three columns are what does the standard term look like, okay? So that's the net terms, and in this case I said it's net 20. So that's going to be net 20 days. That's the standard terms. The columns off to the right are the discount terms definitions. So in this case, I'm saying I got a 2% discount if I pay within 10 days. Okay. Now the only time that this is going to deviate from this kind of setup is going to be in the case where the term is dictated by paying a certain day of the month. And in those cases, what you would do is you go, instead of using the discount days, you would go to the standard discount terms or the standard net terms, depending on what needed to be adjusted in the definition. And then you have certain days of the month that can be defined here, and these are basically predefined in the software. Okay? So it's either net days or a certain day of the month, and depending on what is the details within that payment terms definition, I would go to the appropriate column, one or the other. Okay? All right, so I got my my discount days of 20 days set up there. I could save these terms. Now that new payment term code is going to be available to my vendor and my customer records. So vendor and customer records basically share this payment terms folder. Okay. Sales tax setup. So we're going to go ahead and close out of here and go to the next item, which is tax authority. Now the only item that we give you out of the box is non-taxable. That's easy. There's no percentage with non-taxable. It's just a standard authority that we're using for non-taxable things. If I need to define an authority, so let's say that I need the state of California as an example, then I would set up an ID for that, CA for California, and this is California sales tax. Okay? I would put the corresponding rate here. I have no idea what the sales tax in California is, so let's say it's 7% for just the state tax. And I would say also tell it what the tax type is. So this is going to be a state sales or use tax, so I'd leave that tax type set the way that it is. If you have local taxes, then those can be configured here as well. Now once I have the tax type set up, if I need any exemptions or specific items defined around the sales tax as far as exemptions or rules, that's what these checkboxes allow me to control. The other thing I need to do is go into company and division and select which company the sales tax is going to be allowed for. So I only want this sales tax to be allowed for company number 1 because that's the only place right now I have a chart of accounts. And then I would specify which GL account number the sales tax accruals are going to go to. Okay, so I'm just going to select the same thing for, in my example, for sales tax and sales tax accrual account. Now once I have that saved, that tax authority becomes available to me. Now you may have other tax components that you need to report on. So maybe I have a San Francisco city tax, and maybe, I don't know what that is either, but let's just say that it's an additional 1.25%, and that's going to be a local. And again, I'm going to go to the company and division. I'm going to allow it for my company number 1. I don't even know if I have a local income tax in here. I'll look at that, 2160. It's my lucky day. So I'm going to use that for both the liability accrual for sales tax as well as use tax purposes, and I'm going to save that authority. So defining these authorities are the components that I need to report on. So in that case, I just defined a state, California. I defined a city tax. Now you may also have examples where you just want to set up a general tax percentage so you could add it to something like a purchase order. You don't care about reporting around it. You just want the software to calculate it for you. In that case, I'd set something up more general. So if it was at 8.75% as an example, I might set up a tax authority I call 875. That's going to be 8.75%. Obviously, the tax percentage would be 8.75. And just like those other items, I still need to set up the allowance here, and it's going to require an accrual around this, even though the accrual is going to be irrelevant because that's just going to be a standard percentage that I'm only leveraging on something like purchase orders as an example. Okay? All right. So let me go ahead and get this saved because I want to show you the tax authority links. So in this case, I have several authorities that I've set up. And let's say that when I go and I work in the city of San Francisco, I need to pull a bunch of components together. The tax authority link allows me to do that. So the tax authority link would allow me to say, hey, I'm going to go work in the city of San Francisco. And you'll notice it picks up that tax for me. But when I work in the city of San Francisco, I also need to include this California sales tax. So I can add that item to the link, and now the software is going to keep track of how much of that is San Francisco city tax, how much of that is state tax for me. When I run the corresponding reporting, I will see those individual tax authorities reported separately, so that I get the details that I need on my sales tax reporting. So the adding of links is pretty simple once you have all your sales tax authorities defined. Again, if I save this link, that would be ready for me to use. Okay? So that's the sales tax information. Cost types. Next item down. So cost types is where the specific project or equipment related cost types get defined. You can see an extensive list that we include here for you. The suggestion in getting started would be to, if you're going to be leveraging the standard configuration, i.e. Company 01 for your company, just go with what's already predefined for you here. If you're defining a new company, what you'll notice, to toggle to a new company, I simply click on where my company is right now and I can toggle to my other company. I don't have any cost types for this brand new company. So this is one of the challenges that we face when we're adding a new company is setup items are going to need to be defined for that specific company. In this case, the cost types around projects or equipment that I wanted to define would have to be basically defined and configured for this new company. Now, if we look at our existing company as an example, what we can do is we can pull up one of our cost types. So let's just do something like labor as an example. And that's the cost type ID. That's the cost type name or description. How is this cost type going to be applied? So in this case, labor is going to be applied for project costing or equipment costing. Alternatively, I could set up a cost type if I wanted to for general ledger only. The most common practice around that would be for predefining a cost type that you might call GL only so that you can associate a default cost account with something like a master vendor record. Other than that, everything's probably, for the most part, if you're going to get started from a cost type perspective, going to be associated with projects and or equipment. Now, once these boxes get checked, subtabs open over here. Okay? So the subtabs, what the subtabs allow me to do is they allow me to predefine a default GL account number that that particular cost type is going to be associated with. We can see that this is not a requirement, but if I only am going to have one cost account for that particular cost type, setting up this particular relationship and this link basically tells the software that whenever I'm using that cost type, that's the GL account number that it's going to go to. There's also some places down here to have some default overhead allocation predefined. So if I knew that everything I did from a labor perspective, I would have an overhead percentage or a rate per hour that I want to add on top of that direct labor expense, I could add those things here and the software would automatically add that overhead percentage or that rate per hour for every dollar essentially that I posted into the cost type of labor. Okay? Similar item for equipment. Okay? Now, when I'm defining a cost type, I'm also going to have to select which cost type category that cost type is going to go to. These cost type categories are basically predefined. So if I go to new cost type as an example, you can see what the pre-definition of those cost types are. So these are my general cost type categories that any cost type can fall within. And again, these things are included in the standard data set, predefined, so that you can quickly categorize where that cost type is going to fall into as far as a high-level cost type category. Okay. Again, I think I can't reiterate that cost types is something that if you want to add some, I would strongly encourage having some discussion with a professional services consultant. There are other ways of tracking information besides defining cost types, i.e. Defining job cost codes to get the information that we want so we don't clutter the cost type table. The thing to remember is that these cost types are all these cost types are going to be showing up on my project reporting. So you can imagine if this list gets too extensive, that my project reporting is going to get fairly busy. All right, let's discuss contacts. Before we discuss contacts, let's touch on standard text. So this is where I can predefine some standard text items. So for example, I might have some standard PO information that I want to go on POs. So this might be PO standard information. Whoops. So I might have something in here on my purchase orders. Please include purchase order number when invoicing. Forgive me for the capitalizations and whatnot, but this will give you an idea. So what this will do is if in a memo field I type PO, this text is going to pop up. And I can define under the use text for where I want that to be allowed. So I might want to uncheck all these particular boxes where I'm not going to use that thing and check basically where this is going to, which items I'm going to allow this for. So this probably would only be applicable for purchase orders, and so I would select purchase orders, purchasing from this particular list so that I can only have this for purchase orders. Okay. All right, so that's a quick spiel on the standard text. Now let's get to contacts. As I said before, the contacts are basically individual item or records. So a lot of times what I'll suggest to new users is leave this contact sub-tab open here. So if you need to create a new individual on the fly while you're adding something like a new vendor record or customer record, you'd be able just to toggle to this contact item and then quickly add whoever it is that we need to put the contact information in for. So Joe Smith is an example. Okay. Now, if I want to relate that individual contact record with a specific vendor or customer as an example, I can do that here by setting this. We don't have any vendors or customers set up in this new company yet, but if I do that, what it does is it opens up the field below so that this becomes a browse for me to go ahead and select an existing vendor that I would want to relate this particular contact with as an example. Okay. I think all these fields are fairly self-explanatory. Whatever contact information that I wanted to track with this individual, I would fill in the appropriate fields. Now, one of the things, again, that we can do, which we discussed on the user login, is then also relate this contact with the contact type categories that are going to be applicable to this contact. So one or more of these things could be selected. So if this individual was an estimator and also did sales, I'd select both of those contact types. Now, if I need to add to this contact type list, what I can do is I'll find contact types listed over here underneath the setup. This contact type list, one of the things that I strongly suggested was adding ProContractor users to this. To do that, I could just click to add a line. I might create something that I call PC for ProContractor user. Now I have that ProContractor user type once I've saved that set up in my contact type record. So if I have that contact record that was set up for, I didn't save it, the contact type that was set up based on a new user, I would see that when I basically did this lookup. So in this case, I could pull up the admin if I wanted to, and I could say, hey, the admin user, that's a ProContractor user. And what that does is it allows me something to leverage in the future if I get to document routing or assigning of tasks through ProContractor. It allows me a quick filtering mechanism for getting to my ProContractor users. Okay. All right, let's get into document management settings a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and close out of contacts and come down to the document management settings. And what you'll see is that this document management setting table is nothing more than checkboxes. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to either require a change comment, so there's a change comment field on every single one of these types of documents that's listed on the left. And if somebody goes and makes a change to one of those documents, if I want to force that individual to have to put in a comment on why they're making a change, I just check that box. So change management record, that's change orders essentially. Somebody makes a change to one of my change orders that's been previously saved, they're going to have to make a comment on why they're making a change to that particular change order. Over here on the right-hand column, what this does is when you save a document in ProContractor, you can create a PDF around that document. By checking this box, the software will automatically create that PDF for you, and not only will it create the PDF, but it'll also bind to whatever record that you're creating. So as an example, if I print out a change order proposal from a change management record, and that create PDF, force PDF on save is checked, then what will happen is that document will get bound to the change order, and it will be a binder item that I can pull up later. So if I want the software to automatically save a PDF of any of these documents so that I can see them later, this is where I can basically check the option to do that. Okay? Up here on the top is a box for allowing multiple daily field reports on a single day. So if you have several project managers in the field or superintendents in the field, maybe they're working on the same job with their crews, by turning that on, that allows each superintendent or project manager to submit a daily field report on the same day around the same project, as an example. Document routing distribution control, by turning that on, what it does is it allows me to select certain groups of ProContractor users together under one name, so that when I route that information internally within the software electronically, I don't have to select each one of the users. It's already built in for me. Okay? So those are what those two checkboxes basically do. Now this document management settings, as well as the other document items under setup that we're going to be discussing, will probably also be covered within the project management webinars. So these items are commonly specific to a lot of project management functions. So there may be some redundancy on when these things get discussed throughout webinars and or trainings. Okay. You'll notice if I close something in ProContractor and I haven't saved it, I get the pop-up around save changes. I can say yes or no, and in the case of this example, I'm not really changing my database, I'm just demonstrating some things. So let's go into document management types. So this particular function has a whole bunch of subtabs associated with it. And what this does is it allows me to predefine these various types for these project-related documents. So if I wanted to create a different types of statuses besides just open and closed, I could come in here, add to this table, and add another tracking status. Different types of activities, print, email, import, export. You see those activities listed here. If I wanted to create additional activity types for tracking individual items, I can do that. Within project document control, you have issues. This is categories where I can create those issue types. And how I do that, again, I would add to the table. Similarly, I could have done the same thing for either one of these. And I create that issue type. So in this case, I might create an issue type of unforeseen, and that might be an issue that comes up that I want to report within a daily field report, and or an issue record specifically for unforeseen conditions. So anything that's unforeseen, and I want to create a category within issues for unforeseen conditions, this is how I could do it. And I could continue to add to this particular issues type record and create categories where individual issue records within project management can be categorized and stored for more easily filtering in the future. Okay? This same thing can be applied to all these document control type of items. So a request for information, if I wanted to do the same thing with a request for information, I could basically categorize different RFI types. So this might be our RFI type for material acquisitions. And if I had a specific user-defined form, so if I went in and made a copy of the RFI template, and I wanted to specify which RFI reporting or template that I wanted that type to go with, that's what this report form column does for me. So this report form column also is consistent through all these items, because each one of these items will basically produce a certain type of document. So these functions within this particular document management types allows me to create the categories that I want for any of those specific functions. And if that specific function is going to go with a specific form that I've modified through the SQL report writing tools, then I can relate it with that specific form. So what would happen if you made copies of your RFI form, your request for information form as an example, the entire list of those copies would show up here, and you could relate that particular RFI category with the specific form. Okay? Now this is pretty consistent through each one of these types. So if you look through these first 4 types, or these last 3 types that I went through, they're pretty consistent. The activity types don't have forms. There's no activity document that spits out, just like there's no status document. But anything that generates a document is going to basically have a document or report form column associated with it. Now the daily field reports is an exception to the rule around these types. So there's a whole bunch of different functions within daily field reports that you could predefine if you chose to do so. So precipitation types is an example. I might create something that I call trace precipitation. So we have a trace of rain, and what that's going to be representative of is less than 1/4 of an inch of rain. So I might put something like this in as a precipitation type, so that when my individual users that are putting daily field reports together, either through the software directly or through the iPad app if they're using Mobile Connect, they'll be able to select this trace precipitation item directly from their iPad app, not have to key it in. So that is true for any of these specific daily field report types. If I wanted to predefine some things for these specific functions, I could do so, and that allows me just to select from a drop-down menu around those specific fields within a daily field report instead of having to key everything in. Okay? So it's intended to be, hey, you're going to use this type of item over and over again, right? So if it's clear, I might create a sky type of clear, and that would create the drop-down when I saved it within the daily field report that the individual user could select that just says clear and wouldn't require them to type it into that field when they're putting their daily field report together. Checklist types. This gets back to those similar type records that we had mentioned above. So different types of checklists, if I wanted to predefine categories of checklists that I was going to put together, as well as specify which report form those checklists are going to go with. This is where I could add to that table and define checklist types. Project plan types, exact same type of rule of thumb. There's consistency throughout these things. And again, this is around any of these types of items and project documents. I want to predefine certain types of things for filtering and categorizing these types of documents, and or associating these types of documents with a specific report form. These are the controls that allow me to do that. Okay? So they're very consistent. Anything that ends with a types is very consistent in that it allows me to create a category by adding a line to the table, associate it with a specific report form if I choose to do so, and then save it. Okay? All right. So the other thing that we are going to cover next is going to be a routing distribution group. So again, I think that that really explains at a high level how these types are getting defined. I guess before I move on, we probably should talk about change management records. And the change management records are going to be any types of categories that I want to relate to change reasons. So again, what's going to drive a change? So owner requested change order is an example. That might be a change reason type that I want to predefine so that I can categorize things that owners, if I knew how to spell, owners are basically driving when they're requesting a change. I can track those things. Unforeseen conditions might be another example around a change order, right? So unforeseen conditions would allow me to basically create a category for that so that I can keep track and create a filtering mechanism around change management records specifically. Owner change orders, a little bit different from internal change orders. So CMR records are really driving cost codes. Owner change orders are driving the billings. If I wanted to track different types of owner change orders, I can do that within this table. And field orders, again, optional module. If there's if that's been purchased with your software, this is where you can create categories around field orders and also add the field order stages for tracking what stage a field order or a work ticket. Another word for a field order would be like a work ticket or a work order ticket. And those types and those stages around those things can be defined here. So this document management types has a whole bunch of functionality built into it. And again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go in building a whole bunch of examples around these things. Okay? Document routing distribution group is our next item. This is where I can basically predefine a distribution group and then come in and add the individual users that are going to be associated with that distribution group. So this is where I can define a group of users that need to go together. So when I need to route something to that users, I can define which users those things are going to get routed to and what the role of each one of those users is going to be. All right. Manufacturers table. Manufacturers is basically where you can define equipment manufacturers if you chose to do so. So CAT for Caterpillar is an example. And once I had that defined in here, I would be able to relate that particular manufacturer to a piece of equipment record if I'm using equipment. Okay. System settings. This is basically where you can predefine whether or not you're going to auto-assign a numbering scheme for these types of master file records. And what does that numbering scheme look like? So in this case, what this is telling the software is it's going to start with the alphanumeric ID. So it's going to use the first part of a name, and the first 5 characters of the ID when it auto-assigns is going to be based on the name. Over here to the right, any transaction that's 30 days in the past or 30 days in the future, I'm going to get a warning. And if I wanted to tune this to be 60 days or 90 days, and for warnings, this is where you can tune this for your own needs. Down below you have reports, server settings. Don't touch these. These are basically what tie to SQL report writing services. Binder item types. This is where you can basically add to the types of binder item categories that you want to track, and what type of behaviors are going to be allowed around those binder item types. Again, simple step to add to the table, define it. So this might be emails as an example. And then what am I going to allow around that? Am I going to allow it to be attached? Yes. Do I want it to keep track of who the owner of the record is? Yes or no. So it's going to be disable, allowed, or required are my options. And anything that I set to required, it's going to force me to put something in that corresponding field around a binder item before it could be saved. Okay. User-defined fields. I'm not even going to go into this. This is where you can add additional fields to a certain master file record if you chose to do so. If you need to track something that we're not tracking on a certain record, projects, vendor, customer, user-defined fields allows me to add to that. This requires us to basically create our user-defined fields, and when we do that, it's going to require that we have exclusive use of the software, so everybody would have to be out to create user-defined fields around a certain record type or file, and then once you exited the software and went back in, your user-defined field would be basically available to you. Okay? User-defined fields will always show up under the binder subtab for the most part. On master file records, there'll be another subtab for user-defined fields. View administrative setups. This is where I can come in to see all these things that I'm discussing, how I have those things set up. Okay, so users as an example, this is going to show me all my user definitions. And this is where I can get a list of setup items so I can see what's been set up. Now the last thing that we're going to cover as part of this session is posting groups. And posting groups is where you will find initial balance types of posting groups. So if you're going to have more than one user working on any initial balance item, as you're getting started with the software, you may want each one of those users to be within their own posting group. So this is where I could add additional posting groups to do that particular item. So that is, in a nutshell, our presentation for administration items. Let's see if I can get back to the PowerPoint here. So one of the things that I definitely want to pull up on the PowerPoint here is going to be the lesson wrap-up. So this presentation, again, should allow us to facilitate being able to get through some basic setup items, some additional resources that are available, and you might find valuable to cover are basically mentioned on this slide. That would include Administration 101, Projects 109. These things also discuss some of your company setup and some things specific to project documents. If you've never gone into My Viewpoint, logged into the My Viewpoint area, there's also how-to articles within that. That's a very valuable resource, as well as your professional services consultant. Now this slide is available to you. So for more information on our questions around anything that's been presented here, use this address that you currently see on the screen. And if you also want to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, just send a request to this address. And if you find any value in those PowerPoint slides and the paths to those specific things, just send a request to this address, and we would be able to get that PowerPoint to you. So this has been a fairly lengthy presentation. Appreciate you hanging in there with me to get through all the items that we discussed. And again, if you have any questions, please send an email to the address that you see on the screen.